When you die, you see images, probably from the past, you remember things from the past, and you probably see a white light.
Now we're going to go to Matt Morgan, the intensive care doctor who's been writing about what nearly dying teaches us about really living. Morgan's book, A Second Act, is published on the 16th of January. As an ICU doctor, he's met hundreds of people who've come back from the dead. Their hearts having stopped, their bodies unresponsive, before they were miraculously saved thanks to the modern resuscitation techniques in which Matt specialises. He's been finding out whether people's near-death experience was a transformative moment for their second chance at life. Dr. Matt Morgan, welcome to Times Radio.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell me about this book and the kind of themes that you explore within it.
Yeah, I think it started in a few ways, really. As you said, I've worked with patients who've had cardiac arrests and been resuscitated for many, many years. And I've often thought, they are the ones we should be listening to, not business gurus, or you've mentioned Elon Musk this morning. These are the people who really know what's important in life because they've seen both sides. All of the other advice books are only written by people who have lived and not died. So that's the way I came to this. I've also been collecting the words that many of these people tell me when they recover in a little book for many, many years. And it just struck me that, what a great insight that can help other people, as well as traveling to other places, which expands your mind geographically. Why not travel through the lives of other people to help expand your mind in different ways too?
Yeah, I suppose the first question that occurs in my mind is whether or not the experience of almost dying makes people more afraid of living. They've been exposed to the fragility of life, or whether it generally gives them a second lease of life where it's more, their life is then more about gratitude. How do you find that tends to break down within people?
Yeah, it is, of course, generalized. And I've picked 10 patients, all of which who have died in different ways and then had a second chance at life. So it is a self-selected look from, the point of view of those 10 people. So it's hard to talk from everyone. But you're right, there is definitely a phenomenon known as survivor's guilt, for example. Even people who survive a cardiac arrest from a heart attack, often they say things like, why me? Why did I survive? And why did other people not? So there's a thread of that. But pretty much universally, all of the people involved in my book are very grateful to be alive, and that's even for those who died on purpose, who wanted to die by suicide. And all of them have also had a perspective of finding a new appreciation of life, I guess.
I mean, when people, because there must be a moment for people that weren't expecting to die. How do they react when you first tell them that they were dead or nearly dead? What do they feel like in that moment? What's it like to even be present for that moment?
Yeah, I think it varies hugely. And, some people will laugh and joke. Some people will say, oh my goodness, my wife will kill me. There's a whole range of emotion. Quite a lot of the time, they don't believe you. They think, no,
Oh.
I was fine. And I guess it doesn't help that death in itself is a tricky concept. Out of all of the things that we do in medicine, death, bizarrely, is one that isn't defined in law as a statutory, process. It's something which is much more continuous nature rather than something that's written down in law, so to speak.
And just to ask you personally, when you have resuscitated somebody and brought them back, from the dead, how does that feel? I mean, it's not wrong to say that must be a positive experience. Is there a certain euphoria that goes with that, or do you feel panicked afterwards as you reflect on how delicate that situation must have been?
Yeah, I think out of all the things of being a doctor and deciding to do medicine, I think if you describe to someone the ability of someone to effectively be dead and to give what is pretty simple treatment, actually, CPR, for example, and then for someone to be alive, that is truly magic. That's amazing. And the most amazing thing is it absolutely doesn't need doctors. It doesn't need nurses. Uh, Most of the time, the reason the people have survived is because people they love, complete strangers, have done amazing things. They've rescued them, they've pulled them from the sea, they've done CPR, which all of us should learn and can do. That actually is the most powerful thing, not the things I or my team do in the intensive care unit.
I mean, a lot of us, the cliche perception we'd have of a near death or death, as you say, people that have technically been dead for sometimes minutes, is we think of traveling towards a light. Is that in any way accurate? Is that just a cliche, or do people tend towards a religious understanding of it, or even a supernatural one?
Yeah, that's definitely described, and a lot of people in this book, probably about half of them, describe that phenomena. And in fact, I found an amazing study where there was a chap who, because of severe end-stage cancer, he had in place a do not resuscitate order, and he happened to be in a study at that time doing scans of his brain for another reason, effectively. It was a special study called an fMRI study that shows different bits of your brain lighting up at different times. And he happened to die during that scan.
Wow.
Now, because there was a do not resuscitate order in place, he died during the scan. And when the scientists analysed the results, the amazing thing was the bits of your brain that light up are, wait for it, bits which memory is important for, bits which images are important for, and bits which light is important for. In other words, it appears, at least in his case, when you die, you see images, probably from the past, you remember things from the past, and you probably see a white light. And that's
Wow,
not
that's
a
incredible.
yeah, it's not a religious phenomenon. That is the process of brain or neuronal or cell death, if you like.
I mean, that was a moment of chance, obviously, in a very negative way. But is that the only case that we have of somebody's brain being scanned to that detail at the point of death?
Yeah, certainly that amount of detail. There are some others where there's electricity readings of the brain and so on, and they show something quite similar. They show signs of nostalgia or memory, if you like, lighting up. But that's certainly the only scan in that amount of detail.
There's an incredible phrase you use in the book when you reflect on patients in a slightly different position in intensive care, who, as you put it, are in the thick fog of between life and death. How does that fit in the spectrum of people experiencing death or near-death experiences?
Yeah, I think that's probably because, death, as I said, it isn't defined in law, although we have to assess it as doctors and others. But there is this grey zone, this transition phase. And of course, the 10 patients in the book, they hadn't really died, although if this resuscitation had been unsuccessful, they would have remained dead. So, there is this weird grey zone, as I call it, a fog between life and death. And I suppose after writing this book, I wanted to try to kind of get into that fog a little bit more and appreciate, what these people have been through. And that's tricky to do. It's tricky to do unless you yourself are unwell. But what I managed to do in the end, which is theatre to an extent, is I actually held a living funeral with me and my friends to try to enter into that fog, even if it's just a little bit.
The causes of death are, so wide and varied: lightning strike, hypothermia, overdoses, heart attacks. I mean, is the cause of someone's near death a huge factor in how they approach what you call their second act?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I think it's a universal survival thing, which makes you look back and appreciate life. There's a great phrase that somebody used during the book, which is you have two lives. Your second life starts when you realize you have one. And I think that really summarizes, a lot of the changes that the people feel in the book. But yes, of course, there are people who have died because of sheer bad luck, if you like. There are people who have wanted to die on purpose, as is the case of one of the people in the book, and that changes the perspective that they have a lot, actually. Um, but I think overall, the experience they come out with, the reason they go into it is probably not as important.
You mentioned there that phrase about, can you repeat that phrase? I think it's worth repeating about your second life starts when you realise you've got one. I've completely butchered it, but can you just remind us?
Yeah, yeah. So I think the phrase captured is we have two lives. The second begins when you realize you have just one.
Okay, so what that made me wonder is there a kind of community-based online element for this? Do people that have gone through this try and congregate? Because that phrase sort of alludes to the idea that there are people that collectively think more deeply about this subject.
Yeah, I think, there is a community of cardiac arrest survivors, and importantly, there's a community of people who've done CPR on other patients too, because that in itself is a huge thing to go through. But I think more broadly, the point of this book, it isn't really about death. It's about life. It's not morbid. Yes, it encounters the things that all humans will go through, which is death. Death is life's greatest invention, as Steve Jobs once said. But ultimately, it's about life, and you don't have to die to get that appreciation. I hacked it, if you like, by arranging my own living funeral to try to have a taste of that. But there's ways of getting there without having to die yourself. And that's what I hope. I hope people will read the book and realize that, they have two lives. The second begins when they realize they have one through the experiences of others, for example.
I mean, you witness people, as you say, that die through pure bad fortune in the case of lightning strikes or some undetected or dormant heart diseases. Is it sometimes make it difficult for you to look at people that live recklessly within their own lives? Would you be keen for them to read this book to learn certain moral messages?
Well, I think I've learnt a lot through caring for people like that too. There's a few examples in the book. There's Rhys Thomas, who is the Welsh rugby player, for example, who made some really tough life choices after having a massive heart attack and actually needing a heart transplant. He would wake up on occasions in police cells where his mechanical heart, which he had to wear 24 hours a day, the batteries were bleeping and about to, in inverted commas, die, as would he. So there's a lot of people who've made tough life choices, but what this book really shows, I think there's two things. Firstly, you are not your worst mistake. And I think that's a really important life lesson to come out with. I meet a lot of people who've made bad choices in life, but the truth is, we've all made those bad choices, and it's often luck that we are not the ones in intensive care. I've drunk too much. I've in the past driven too fast or driven when I'm tired, but I've been lucky through moral luck that wasn't me in intensive care. I think the other thing it teaches us, and this is another quote from one of the patients in there, which is the time to make your mind up about somebody is never. People truly can change. Not always, but people can change. And I think having that humility is important.
Okay, well, I think it's really interesting stuff, Matt, and thanks for the chat this afternoon. Your book, Matt Morgan's book, A Second Act, What Nearly Dying Teaches Us About Really Living, is available to order at timesbookshop.co.uk, where Times Plus members can enjoy a 20% discount on that and thousands of other titles.